one beachhead at a time. On June the 6th, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Neptune, the invasion of occupied Europe. The landings, commonly known as D-Day, on the coast of Normandy, France had one objective: to secure a beachhead or foothold. Ron Douglas looks at the lessons we can learn from D-Day and how beachheads can be applied to our everyday life. Dieter Müller yawned loudly and rubbed at his eyes. Another 12-hour shift was almost at an end, and all he wanted to do was collapse on his bed and sleep. He had never felt so tired in his life. The dawn was beginning to break, and it was light enough for Dieter to glance down at his wristwatch. He saw that it was 6:15. Another 45 minutes, and he was off duty. He stood and gazed across the sea, which was covered with a thick blanket of mist. The sky was overcast, and Dieter thought it may rain again. It had poured the previous day. As the mist slowly began to clear, Dieter began to make out shapes on the horizon. At first he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. The entire horizon was covered with ships. Hundreds, no, thousands of ships. For a moment he did nothing, just stood there with his mouth hanging open. Then he came to his senses and began to shout at the top of his voice, "Alarm! Alarm! Alarm!" The date was June 6, 1944, and the Allied invasion of Europe was about to begin. World War II began on September 1, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. By June 1940, the last Allied troops had been evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk in France. Almost all of Europe was now occupied by Nazi Germany. At the beginning of 1944, things were not going well for the Germans. The German army was on the retreat on the Russian front, slowly having to give up territory to the advancing Russians. The Germans also knew that eventually the Allies would attempt an invasion and open up a second front. That invasion came on June the 6th, 1944, when the Allies launched Operation Overlord, the liberation of Europe. The initial part of the plan, named Operation Neptune, would see the Allies carry out an amphibious invasion along an 80-kilometer stretch of coastal Normandy, France. It was the largest amphibious invasion in world history. More than 160,000 troops, 73,000 Americans, 61,715 British, and 21,400 Canadians would land on D-Day, the first day of the invasion. 195,700 Allied naval and merchant navy personnel in over 5,000 ships were also involved. Let's just stop for a moment and consider all of this. If the objective of Operation Overlord was to defeat Nazi Germany and liberate Europe, then why were they landing on some small stretch of coastline in France? Surely the plan should have been to invade Germany. So why not take a few paratroopers and drop them onto Berlin, the capital of Germany, and say, "Okay, we're here in Berlin now, so Europe is liberated." What were the Allies doing landing in Normandy, some 1,036 kilometers away from Berlin? You see, the Germans were not about to give up Europe without a fight. Dropping a few paratroopers into Berlin would not cause the Germans to say, "Oh look, there's 10 British paratroopers in Berlin, we surrender." The Allies would have to fight for every kilometer, and to do this they would need manpower and equipment. The Allies had no bases in Europe, and everything, men and equipment, would have to be brought across the sea from England. To achieve this, the Allies would need to capture a port or harbour, and the Germans obviously knew this. The Germans were convinced that the invasion would take place near Calais. This made a lot of sense for two reasons. First of all, Calais had a large harbour, and secondly, it was only 40 kilometers from the English port of Dover to Calais. The Allies did everything in their power to convince Adolf Hitler that the invasion would take place at Calais. A number of deception campaigns were undertaken to achieve this. The deception plan worked so well that for a number of days after the Allies landed at Normandy, Hitler was still not convinced it was a real invasion. He refused to allow reinforcements to be sent to Normandy because he still believed that the actual target was Calais. Yet why were the Allies landing at Normandy? What did they hope to achieve? The answer is simple. The Allies needed to establish a beachhead. They needed to capture a foothold in Europe from where they could establish a safe area where more manpower and equipment could be brought across from England. Once they had enough men and equipment, they could set out towards Calais, capture the port, and soon the trickle of men coming across from England would turn into a flood. It allowed them to build sufficient manpower and equipment to fight across Europe, into Germany, and in May 1945 defeat Nazi Germany and bring the war in Europe to an end. Now, while this may be interesting, you may find yourself asking the question, so what has this got to do with me? D-Day was in 1944 and this is 2016. How do I benefit from this? Well, one of the nice things about history is that it can teach us important lessons. And there is an important lesson we can learn from D-Day. Remember the objective of Operation Neptune? To establish a beachhead? Well, this is something we can apply to our own lives. Most of us have goals that we want to achieve. These may be short-term, mid-term, or even long-term goals. Yet while many of us know where we want to go, we have no idea of how we're going to get there. Let's say, for example, you average 40% in maths. You want to change that to at least 80%. Now, while that may be a very noteworthy goal, it's also not an easy one. And if you go about it the wrong way, all you're going to do is end up demotivating yourself. So instead of trying to achieve your goal in one step and go from 40% to 80%, you need to establish a beachhead first. Why not try to go from 40% to 50%? If you can achieve this, then you've established a beachhead and you're ready to move on to the next beachhead, 60%. In this way, you move closer and closer to your ultimate goal. Let's look at another example. Many of us enjoy our food. I know, I'm one of them. And not only did I enjoy food, I also enjoyed junk food. When I was in matric, my nickname was Blubber Boy. When I finished school, I decided that I wanted to lose weight. Not only was I going to lose weight, I was going to run the Comrades Marathon the following year. Naturally, everyone thought I was mad. Now take a word of advice from me, and thousands others. It's not that easy to lose weight. I wanted to lose 12 kilograms, and there was no way possible I could do it all in one go. Nor could I get fit overnight. Once again, it was a question of establishing a beachhead. My first goal was to lose 1 kilogram, and my first goal in the quest towards fitness was being able to walk 1 kilometer without stopping, or dying in the process. Within a month, I was walking 5 kilometers a day, and I'd almost lost that first kilogram. My next beachhead was running. First, I aimed at 2 kilometers, then 5. By the time I was running 5 kilometers every morning, I'd lost almost 3 kilograms. 5 months after I walked that first kilometer and established my first beachhead, I ran my first marathon. The following year, I not only ran the Comrades Marathon, I finished it and earned myself a Comrades Medal. I'd also lost 14 kilograms by that stage. All of this was achieved by establishing beachheads. It's all about taking it a step at a time. The D-Day landing at Normandy in 1944 didn't bring an immediate end to the war, but it was the first step in the process that would in fact end the war. 2 years ago, when I was at university, I met the most amazing girl. It was love at first sight. Well, for me anyway. I doubt whether she even knew I existed. I wanted nothing more than to ask her out on a date, but I somehow suspected that she would have just turned me down. So I decided the first step would be to establish a beachhead. I discovered that she was very into photography and was a member of the photographic club. So my very first step was to also become a member of the photographic club. The guy that ran the club would often divide us into pairs and then give us an assignment, something we had to photograph. I went to him and asked him if he would mind putting this girl and I as a pair. He just smiled and said okay. From then on, she and I would often work together on photographic projects, and 3 months later asked her if she would like to go out for coffee. It was our first date. Last month we became engaged. I once asked her if she would have gone out on a date with me before she got to know me as a friend. She just laughed and said there was no way she would ever have gone out with me. She said it was only once she got to know me better that she started to like me. So you see, my plan of establishing a beachhead worked, just as it's done with many things in my life. I needed to decide what my final objective was, then plan the steps I would take to reach that object, and then establish beachheads. Why not give it a try yourself?